to part 2 of chapter 7. So here's our good shepherd again. I like him a lot. Thought this would be a good header for this section. So now we're going to talk about Christianity, early Christian art, and the Christian beliefs. This is, in case you don't know, Christians believed that the Jewish man, Jesus of Nazareth, was the son of the only true God, and that he was born to a virgin named Mary. The first 4 books of the New Testament, part of the Bible, they describe the life of Jesus, who focused his ministry on his Jewish community. Christianity was first allowed in the Roman Empire under Constantine in 313 CE, and we saw that in the Roman chapter. Art and its contents. So, in case you haven't figured this out, Christianity becomes the dominant religion in Europe for centuries now, from this point on. And the iconography of the life of Jesus looks a lot like this. This is a simplified version. I think I posted on Canvas a more complete list with the description of what all of these look like. So first of all is the Annunciation, where the angel tells Mary she's going to have a baby. Then we have the birth of Jesus. Then after the birth, we have Jesus and his Mary and Joseph, his 2 parents, although Joseph is just sort of a step-parent flying into Egypt to escape their punishment. Then we have then Jesus grows up, and we don't see him for a long time until he becomes an adult and he has his baptism. And then we have miracles, so he performs miracles, his passion, death, and resurrection, and then Mary's death. So you will also see in this course how the Virgin Mary will become really, really, really important in the Middle Ages, but not yet. She's sort of a minor player in these early years. Now, I showed you also in the first one a catacomb with a depiction of a good shepherd on the ceiling. There were others, but here's a good shepherd that is carved of marble, and this comes also from the fringes of the Roman Empire in the Eastern Mediterranean in present-day Turkey. So this dates from the second half of the 3rd century. Always keep in mind that date of 313 when Christianity became legal. So this is before that date. So it's still done in an underground situation. It's carved of marble. It's about 20 inches tall. And it shows a very similar Jesus dressed like a simple young man, a working man, wearing his little tunic. He's got some sheep down around his feet. He's got a sheep over his shoulders. He is not bearded. He does not have a halo. There is nothing about him that makes him look regal or imperial or even godlike. And part of this is to disguise the image of Jesus so he's not readily recognizable by the Roman authorities. So he's sort of undercover here, just dressed as an ordinary shepherd. There were also shepherds that appear in Roman iconography, so it was an easy thing to get away with, using Jesus as shepherd. Now this one was carved in the context of some more. There was a group of these 5 marbles that were found together, and now they are all in a museum in Cleveland. And they represent the story of Jonah. So that's why I told you about the Jonah tale and how that prefigures the story of Jesus. So here's our shepherd over here, but the other 4 are all Jonah. So here is Jonah praying, holding his arms up, just like we saw the people in the catacombs. Then here's Jonah swallowed up by the whale. Jonah spit up, Jonah cast out, it's called, and Jonah sleeping under the gourd vine, Jonah praying. Now I really like these, so I wanted to get some better quality JPEGs to show you. So here are my 2 select pictures of Jonah swallowed and Jonah cast up. They're awesome. I mean, seriously, look at that sea monster. These This was made by an artist over in Turkey. Had never seen a whale, had maybe familiarity with the Hebrew scripture description of this as a large leviathan or a sea monster. So just kind of made it up. And you can see there it's a composite figure with like the tail of a fish or an eel, the head that looks kind of dog-like and paws that look dog-like, some fins or wings to the side, ears, which just, if you were swimming in the ocean, they just get filled with water. Then we have Jonah's legs sticking up like little doll legs. Then after 3 days in the whale's stomach, he gets spit out. And here he comes with his beard, his arms outstretched. These are great. I also at this point want to point out the craftsmanship of these, because compared to what we saw over in Dura Europus and in Galilee, the craftsmanship is amazing. Really good marble carving, even details on the legs, really good proportions. These are not just symbols of legs, but they are classically conceived of legs. The tail of this sea monster, for example, like where it bends, there are even little creases up there. I mean, to me, this is excellent craftsmanship. One of these days, I'll get up to Cleveland and get to look at these in person, but I think they're truly amazing. So we have this coming out of the 3rd century. So religious toleration began with the Edict of Milan, aka the Edict of Toleration, and spurred the building of Christian churches. The Constantinian Basilica of St. Peter became the Pope's church. Architectural elements there included transepts and provided a model for future Christian churches. It is no longer standing. Please pay attention to that red statement. There will be a trick question on the quiz that catches a lot of people off guard. Because it is lost to history, that structure is referred to as Old St. Peter's. So here again, we are looking at this great map of Rome, and now we're focusing on this circus that was over here outside of the walls on the other side of the Tiber River. This was Nero's circus. So Nero, that emperor, the Romans loved to hate him. After Nero's death, the circus was destroyed. It went to ruin. So, a story. You get a story. During the 1st century, after the crucifixion of Jesus, his followers sort of spread out through the known world, bringing the news, spreading the gospel throughout the Roman Empire. And many of them were killed, all except one, in fact, were killed, were martyred for their faith. But 2 of his followers came to Rome. This is, legend has it, there's only verbal proof. There's no actual physical evidence that they came. But one was Peter, who is one of the disciples, and the other was Paul, who was not a disciple but came to believe early on and was very important in spreading the faith. So both Peter and Paul came to Rome, and they were both killed in Rome. So there are churches here with the ruins of both Peter and Paul. So now, back to my main narrative. This is the story of Peter. So Peter was the leader of the Christian church in the city of Rome, and when he was arrested, he was killed at Nero's circus, probably as an entertainment. And down here is a model of Nero's circus, where they would have the horses or chariots racing around the outside. And then in between races, they might have another entertainment out here in the center of the racetrack on this structure called the spina, which is like the spine. And they would do things like kill Christians for fun. So the legend is that Peter was killed in between races one day. Then Peter was buried nearby, and right behind the circus, because we're outside of the city, there was a cemetery, and so Peter was buried there. This is the 1st century, right? This was a long time ago. But there's still a Christian church in Rome, and they knew where he was buried, and that information was passed down from generation to generation. Probably people came and kept that information alive and visited the grave. Then when Constantine said it's okay to worship freely at the Edict of Toleration, my imagination says that somebody in that Christian church told him, informed him about the location of Peter's grave. And he said, that's great news. Let's put a church where Peter was buried. So they go over and find the site and then build the very first ground up church in Rome. So it's not the very first worship place in Rome, public worship place, but it was the first one that was built from the ground up. So now here's this great plan showing you the blue line, which is the Circus of Nero, and the Spina, where he was killed. And we've got some monuments there that were standing at that time. I don't believe they're there anymore. And nearby was the burial place, which was preserved. And so when Constantine wanted to build his church, he simply preserved that as a crypt, or like this underground burial, and built his church on top of it, called Old St. Peter's. These very pale lines in the background represent the remodeled church from later on. We'll talk about this later in the course. During the Renaissance and Baroque periods, the old St. Peter's was torn down and a completely new, much bigger structure was built on top of it, or where it was, and including this big plaza out front. So we're going to now talk about that old St. Peter's. This is how it would have looked, and we can only look at drawings because, as I just told you, it was destroyed, so there's no church left. So Old St. Peter's was designed after that basilica shape of those Roman buildings that I showed you. We looked at 2 basilicas in depth, and it was a very long rectangular building. And this is because the Christians who used to gather in people's homes, as the faith spread and the crowds got bigger, gathering together for a worship service was central to the expression of their faith. So they needed a large space where many people could come and hear the message of a priest, could participate in what was left of that love feast, which is now just the communion, just the bread and wine. And they would come together for corporate worship, we call it. The Romans never had done that. The Romans just brought their offerings to the temples and went home. So the Christian need for a big space brought the basilica into common use. And there's a courtyard out here. This fountain could have been a place where baptism. I mean, nobody can see this and analyze it now because it doesn't exist. So this is a lot of speculation. But there were people who made pictures of Old St. Peter's, who drew them. So we do have some knowledge of this. So here's the nave. The central part of a basilica is called the nave, and it comes from the same root as navy, so it's ship-like. And then this has 2 side aisles. And just look at the colors of stones on these columns, and this represents the fact that these columns were taken from the Roman Forum. As we looked at the ruins of Rome, I said the Christians had removed the stones and reused them, and this shows that being done, or illustrates that idea. So on this plan over here, we have the nave in the center, and we have 2 side aisles. This little X marks the spot of Peter's tomb, which is still there and is underground in this crypt. So this is a new form, this transept it's called, which is another rectangular section that sort of intersects the basilica at a right angle. And all of this was built to facilitate the gathering of worshipers in the nave, but also the movement of pilgrims through the side aisles. So it became a popular place that Christians wanted to come to be near the remains of Peter. They would visit his grave, come down the side aisle, circulate through here, go down into the crypt, and touch his sarcophagus, or have a piece of cloth and touch the sarcophagus. I will discuss this whole phenomenon of relics and the veneration of saints later, but it's sort of, it has an early origin here. So coming close to the grave, then they would circulate out, come down a side aisle, and exit the church down here. They could do this. Pilgrims, that's what they're called, the ones who visit the grave. The pilgrims could visit and move through here while people are gathered in the nave and participating in Mass. So the two events could happen simultaneously. There were mosaics on the wall, and they're just totally lost, except for possibly this little piece that survived that has been suggested that it could be Peter, but whoever it is, it was on the wall of Old St. Peter's, and you can tell that it's pretty well crafted, very nice dimensions to the face, modeling of the eye sockets, everything. Remember, this is mosaic. These are little pieces of tile or stone set into a mastic there. So that was built by Constantine, and Constantine had a building program. Constantine apparently accepted Christianity, but there's a lot of debate about how sincere he was, and that he was not actually baptized until he was dying. So I'm not going to say he was a Christian emperor. I'm just saying he built Christian churches. So he also built this, or was responsible for the building of this, which is the mausoleum for his daughter Constantina, or Costanza. And this is a completely different form of building. This was not intended to be for corporate worship. So people would not gather here in that same way. They would not hear preaching. They would not celebrate the communion here. But instead it functioned more like the crypt with St. Peter's body, where people would come here to be near the tomb of her. And by the way, almost every Christian who dies of note here becomes a saint. Anybody who was killed by the Romans, if their story is known, their remains, and there are so many saints, and they're all like popping out of the woodwork at this early age. So she becomes a saint. I'm not real sure how she qualified, but nevertheless, people wanted to be near her remains. So they would enter through this little entry porch called the narthex, and they would come into this building. It's called the central plan, right over here, also known as martyrium. So it's different than a basilica, and there's a focal point, usually right in the center. So it's not open in the center. There's something there. And this has an ambulatory or a walkway that you can move around the outside. Has a raised center section with windows up above that are, there's our word again, clear story windows. St. Peter's also had clear story on it. Let's go back and look. St. Peter's has clear story windows here. You can see them. So any high windows. That's why when we were looking at clear story in Egypt, I said that term will always be with us. So there we are, clear story windows. Now I bet you'd like to see the interior of this. Well, in a minute you will. Here's the exterior. I think it's been lovingly restored because it's in excellent condition. There are the clear story windows of Santa Costanza. There had been a basilica nearby. There's a very important martyr church here called Santa Agnese, but it's obviously they let that basilica go. And this is the interior of Santa Costanza, which I think is absolutely lovely. The way that the clear story windows bring in this gentle sunlight, and it just kind of so it doesn't hit anything directly. It just sort of fills the space with a warm glow. It's lovely. The ambulatory is like a giant barrel vault that encircles this space. So it's a round barrel vault, and it's covered with mosaics, which are also very interesting. I'm sure you can see those if you take Art History 1. That close, but we're not going to go that deep. So paired columns with Corinthian capitals here. But there's just a nice sense of balance and design here. And it's a beautiful little structure. Now this is a bonus feature. I do have lots of bonus features as we go through this course. And this is the Missorum of Theodosius. So Theodosius was the emperor of Rome in 379 to 395. And I include this because to me it's remarkable that there could be such a rapid change in Rome within 1 century. So you remember that 313 was the year that Constantine said it was legal to be Christian. In 379, when Theodosius became emperor, he said it was illegal not to be a Christian. So he's proscribing or making it illegal to practice the pagan Roman religions. They had been sort of dwindling, but they were always present in Rome. There were always pagans around and families who just sort of refused to join the Christian church. But now Theodosius says, no more. You cannot practice that pagan religion because there's only one God and everybody needs to get on board with him. So interesting. What's more interesting is look at how he has shown himself. This is him. He's made himself larger than everybody else. He seated himself up on a throne. He gives himself a halo. So in a lot of ways, that old language from pagan Rome of deifying the emperor continues, not literally, like nobody would dare to say that Theodosius was a god, but they illustrate him in that same visual language that the Roman emperors had been illustrated in. So he is shown here in godlike form. Weird. 5th century, here's a basilica that is in the city of Rome that is well preserved, that is probably the closest surviving building that resembles Old St. Peter's, although Old St. Peter's would have been bigger and grander than this. But nevertheless, this is what we have to look at. So this is Santa Sabina, and you can see a basilica is just a large rectangular space. This one has a round apse, and it has a group of clear story windows. It's also in very good condition. I'm sure it's been restored many times. This is the interior of Santa Sabina, and I put this little question there just to nudge your memory, like pay attention to those windows. This is the interior of what a simple basilica looks like. So it has, this is called the nave arcade. When separating the nave section from the side aisle section is an arcade supported by columns. And you can see these columns look funky, right? The top part is different than the bottom part. That's because these were Roman and they weren't tall enough, so the new people had to add some at the bottom. So when they take things and reuse them, it's called spolia, which is where we get the word spoils. So they're recycling architectural pieces. I think it's very green of them to reuse them. But it's really sad for the monuments in Rome. So the fall of Rome. We're not really going to talk a whole lot about politics. We never do. But many factors contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire. One was the threat of barbarian invasion. In 402, the political capital was moved to Ravenna. So you can see on the map here, I showed you Rome, and there's Ravenna. It was moved to Ravenna to secure continuity in the event of the Gothic invasion. And part of the story of Western art is written in Ravenna. So there is a very short chapter in this backwater city of Ravenna. And because it didn't continue past this, the buildings are pretty much intact. This is the first building we're looking at in Ravenna. This is the Oratory of Galla Placidia. It's cross-shaped brick. There are exterior pilasters, so it's a small little building. It was for burial. It was not a place for worship. Just notice a few things. One is the building material, which is completely different. Almost everything here in Ravenna is made of this brick, and clear story windows here. I like to think of this almost like a geode because the outside is just so rough and crude and plain, and then you come inside and every surface is covered with beautiful, colorful mosaics. So this is the interior of it, and there are 4 barrel vaults on the 4 arms, and the doors on one of them, but on the other 3 there are these sarcophagi, and then a lunette or half moon mosaic over a tomb. So I'm going to show you one of those. This is one of the windows up above, and it's covered, the window opening is filled with alabaster, which is like marble, and it's just cut very thin so that light comes through, but not the weather, not birds or anything like that. So this is on one of the lunettes at that building. And it's again our shepherd. So here we are in the 5th century, and we see yet another representation of Jesus as Good Shepherd. He's looking a little different. This shepherd now is not wearing his little tunic. He doesn't look like a farm boy. He looks kind of royal. His robe, in fact, is gold mosaic, and it's real gold. These are little sandwiches of gold leaf in between 2 thin sheets of glass, so it sparkles. And then his cloak that is draped over his lap is purple, which comes directly from the language of Imperial Rome. It was the emperors who were allowed to wear purple. It was nobody else could wear that. It was illegal. Then our Jesus has a beautiful, huge golden halo, and he's carrying a cross to remind us of his martyrdom, his crucifixion, and I believe it's our first cross. We haven't seen that. His sheep are looking very symbolic, so they're not lovingly naturalistic, but I mean there's enough detail here. Odd looking rocks. So just to contrast, remember our marble shepherd there, looking peasantish, looking ordinary, like a working boy, and the man in the mosaic no longer looks peasantish. This is the ceiling mosaic in there. I just think it's a beautiful pattern. It's supposed to be stars in the heavenly sky in Galla Placidia. Sorry. I always have a phlegmy throat. I think it's allergies. Anyway, this is Sarcophagus of Junius Bassus, and this is back in the city of Rome. Junius Bassus was a senator, meaning he's one of the ruling class in Rome, and he was Christian. So he represents his faith in his sarcophagus. Yeah, we've jumped back in time a little, but that's because we're looking at some sculpture now. This was the only form of sculpture that was encouraged by Christianity. So they just simply did not want to create 3-dimensional images of God or Jesus because they didn't want people to be tempted to worship those 3-dimensional images. It's kind of like the Jewish aversion to imagery, period. They just didn't want to do it. So what little we have in 3 dimensions is on sarcophagi. So this was a tomb. This is where Junius was entombed. So this is also our first grouping of biblical illustrations, of biblical stories. So you can see there are these 5 cells going across the top and 5 cells on the bottom. So it's 10 cells. And now you can look at the imagery and you can see it's a hodgepodge of Old Testament and New Testament things. Down here, Adam and Eve, for example. Over here is Daniel in the lion's den. And over here is Job. I like to see if students know that what they're looking at. But Jesus is here also. So Jesus is shown here sitting on the throne of heaven, symbolically representing his dominion over all of the earth, all of creation. And he's shown as sort of a youngish man, beardless. He's also over here showing his arrest, and he's being brought to Pontius Pilate. So this is 2 frames for one scene. Pontius Pilate is sitting here. One of his attributes is always a basin of water or a jug of water, where it symbolizes the fact that he just said he washed his hands of this troublesome Jew. He doesn't want anything to do with them. Let's see, I have the list of the iconography. So left to right at the top we have Abraham, then we have Peter, then Jesus here as the lawgiver, the Lord of all. And the arrest over here, as I told you. And on the bottom row, Job, Adam and Eve, we have Jesus in Jerusalem riding on a donkey. So don't know if this is Zacchaeus. I think probably it is, but other people have said it's Jesus cursing the fig tree. I don't think so. But it could be him arriving in Jerusalem. Daniel in the lion's den, and down here is Paul arrested. So the earliest, this is 4th century, the earliest examples of this iconography. Also, I want you to notice at this point the style of the sculptures. Look at the proportions of the bodies. And I told you we were going into symbolic mode, where that love of naturalism, of verism, will go away. And you can see the figures, the proportions are not particularly good. Doesn't matter as long as you recognize the story that they're illustrating. That's what counts. The one exception is, if you look at Daniel's head, it's smaller than the other heads and it looks pretty well crafted. That's because it was a replacement head. Daniel's original head fell off, and somebody later on made a nicer head for him. So that's all good. This is the end of part 2. You have one more part as we look and see what Byzantine art is all about. So stay tuned.